All right, so today we're diving deep, and get this, into a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking.
Catchy title, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it really gets you thinking. Have you ever felt completely drained after like just being in a loud, crowded place?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Like a battery that's just been completely zapped.
Exactly. And it's funny because this book, it really digs into that feeling and it explores, those assumptions we all have about what it means to be an introvert or an extrovert.
And honestly, I think there's something in it for everyone, no matter where you fall on that spectrum.
Definitely. So, Quiet, it's written by Susan Cain, and she kind of kicks things off by challenging this big misconception that introversion is just shyness or like,
Right.
you're just awkward in social situations.
Right. And I think a lot of people get tripped up by that, but she makes this really important point that it's actually more about how you process the world around you, like how you react to all that stimulation.
Right. It's not that you don't like people, it's just that you engage with everything differently.
Exactly. And she has this really cool example. She talks about Steve Wozniak.
Wozniak. Wait, the Apple guy?
Yeah, the co-founder of Apple. And guess what? He's a self-proclaimed introvert.
Really? No way.
Yeah, and get this. He actually says that his preference for working solo, like really on his own, led to some of his biggest breakthroughs.
Oh, wow. That's pretty surprising. I mean,
Yeah.
don't you always hear about how collaboration is, the key to innovation and all that?
Well, yeah, but think about it. When you're working by yourself, there's this intense focus, right? No distractions, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to get those creative juices flowing.
Like those aha moments.
Exactly. And for Wozniak, that kind of deep thinking led to, developing the Apple II.
Oh, right, the one that kind of like changed everything. Like suddenly everyone had a computer.
Exactly. It revolutionized personal computing. And it was all because he was able to just, get into that zone, work by himself, and really focus.
Huh? I can definitely relate to that. Like when I'm writing, I need complete silence. I feel like if there's anyone else around, my thoughts just get all jumbled up.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because our society often places so much emphasis on being outgoing and charismatic.
Always on, right?
But Kane's point is that solitude, that quiet time, it can be a real superpower, especially for things like creativity and, really thinking things through.
That's fascinating. So what about those of us who, well, maybe we're not quite Wozniak, but we're not exactly the life of the party either.
Well, she talks about that too. She says most people aren't completely one or the other.
You mean like fully introverted or extroverted?
Right. It's more like a spectrum.
Yeah.
And she really emphasizes that understanding where you fall on that spectrum, it can help you navigate so many things, work, relationships, just life in general.
I mean, I used to think I had to be more outgoing to succeed. Like, I'd get frustrated with myself for not being the most social person. But now I'm realizing that my, I guess, more introverted tendencies can be, an asset too.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that both introverts and extroverts, we bring different strengths to the table.
Right, like everyone has something to offer.
Exactly. And I think the key, like she says, is to really understand yourself and then learn how to, leverage your strengths.
I love that.
Yeah.
Leverage your strengths. So I got to ask, how much of this, being introverted or extroverted, how much is that like, hardwired versus something we learn?
Well, Kane gets into the science of it all, and she suggests that, yeah, there's definitely a biological basis for these differences. Like introverts' brains might be wired to be a bit more sensitive to certain things.
Sensitive. Like in what way?
Well, for example, they might react differently to dopamine, that neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and reward.
Right.
And so it's like, while an extrovert might feel energized in a really stimulating environment with lots of people and noise, an introvert, they might feel completely overwhelmed by that same situation.
Like their battery's draining instead of charging.
Exactly. It's like having different energy gauges.
That's so cool. So it's not just a personality thing. It's actually like how your brain works.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
So I guess for those of us who, lean towards the introverted side, what can we do to, kind of thrive in a world that often feels like it's set up for extroverts?
That's a great question. And Kane gives some really practical advice, like learning to manage your energy when you're in social situations.
Okay, yeah. How do you do that?
Well, say you're going to a big party, right? Maybe plan for some downtime afterwards.
Yeah.
Just to, recharge.
Oh, that's smart. Like build in some quiet time.
Exactly. And another thing, which I know I struggle with, is public speaking.
Oh, tell me about it.
But she says that being really prepared can make a huge difference.
That's actually true. The times I've felt most comfortable speaking in front of people, it's when I, like, knew my stuff backwards and forwards.
Right. Preparation is key. And it also comes down to self-awareness.
Like knowing your limits.
Yeah, the more you understand what you need, the better you'll be able to navigate situations that might otherwise feel, kind of overwhelming.
And this whole thing about introverts and extroverts, I bet it applies to, like, work environments too.
Totally. Kane makes this really interesting argument that companies could really benefit from creating spaces that cater to different work styles.
Okay, like, what do you mean?
Well, instead of those big open plan offices, which can be really distracting for some people, maybe have some quiet zones, for people who need to really
Oh,
focus.
that's a great idea, like a little haven for introverts.
Exactly. And it's not just about the physical space. It's about recognizing that introverted employees, they bring something really valuable to the table.
Right, like, they might not be the ones brainstorming out loud in every meeting.
But they're often the ones who are thinking things through really carefully.
The quiet problem solvers.
Exactly. And their insights and their analytical skills, they can be invaluable.
So it's about, like, really valuing those differences, not trying to make everyone fit into the same mold.
Right. And another really interesting thing she talks about is how cultural norms can influence how we see introversion and extroversion.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like she points out that in some East Asian cultures, introversion is actually seen as a really positive trait.
Really?
Yeah, but in Western cultures, it's often the opposite. We tend to put more emphasis on, being outgoing and assertive.
Which is kind of crazy because it makes you wonder, are we doing a disservice to introverted kids by, constantly pushing them to be more extroverted?
Well, that's something Kane touches on in the book, particularly in her discussion on parenting. She encourages parents and educators to really honor a child's natural temperament.
So, like, if you have a kid who's more introverted, maybe don't force them to be the center of attention all the time.
Right. Maybe instead, encourage their love of reading or their thoughtful observations.
It's about nurturing their strengths instead of trying to change who they are. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm seriously rethinking how I view introversion, both in myself and, in the people around me.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So, after diving into all this, where do you think you fall on that introvert-extrovert spectrum? And how does that awareness, impact your work, your relationships, your life? It's something to ponder.
Lots to think about.